Hello everyone, and welcome to another deep dive on Veil of Time. Today we're tackling a topic that has sparked endless debates, confusion, and even a bit of conspiratorial whispering behind the curtains of history. Were the original Israelites black? And if so, how did we end up with the modern state of Israel, often identified with a mostly white population? Is there a hidden tapestry of migrations, conversions, and shifting identities that most of us never learned in school? You may be thinking, come on, how can the entire biblical narrative of ancient Israel be so drastically different from what I see on TV or read in books? Great question. Let's peel back the layers to see how Africa, the Middle East, and Europe all intertwine in a story that's more colorful and complex than you might suspect. So buckle up, folks. This journey is bound to challenge your assumptions and might even make you laugh along the way, especially when we consider how modern conspiracies fill in the gaps. A surprising heritage? Rhetorical question. Israel? Africa? Isn't Israel in the Middle East? Indeed it is. But consider this provocative claim. The children of Israel, the biblical Israelites, originally came out of Egypt, a land firmly on the African continent, and multiplied into a nation that might have been predominantly black. This idea proposes that Israel's early ancestors weren't pale-skinned desert wanderers, but rather a community deeply tied to African culture and lineage. Let's imagine for a second that you're flipping through your old children's Bible stories, and you see the typical image, a bearded, fair-skinned Moses parting the Red Sea. Now picture that same event with everyone having African features. Mind blown? You're not alone. Throughout history, various scholars and religious communities, particularly some Ethiopian and African American groups, have insisted that ancient Israelites were black, pointing to centuries of Afrocentric traditions, references in biblical genealogies, and even the presence of African cultural norms in early Judeo-Christian thought. The next time you see Charlton Heston on TV in the Ten Commandments, just imagine he's sporting a dashiki instead. Hollywood might have missed that memo. The Abraham conundrum. So let's dig deeper into the biblical patriarch Abraham, or Abram, depending on which chapter of Genesis you read. Some researchers label him a black Shemite, connecting Shem's lineage to African genealogical lines. According to that perspective, if Abraham was indeed of African descent, that changes how we visualize the entire Old Testament cast. But how did Abraham's family tree explode so dramatically? Remember Hagar, the Egyptian woman who bore Abraham's first son Ishmael? She was African, and their offspring would blend Shemitic and Hamitic lineages. Over the centuries, these branches supposedly spread across the region, resulting in large groups of black Arabs and Ethiopians who trace some spiritual or genealogical link back to the patriarch. Could there be a global effort to hide a historically black Abraham? Or is it more benign? A centuries-old confusion born from Renaissance-era religious paintings and Eurocentric retellings of the Bible? King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, a love story for the ages? Let's fast forward to one of the most famous biblical romances, or at least alliances, King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. The Ethiopian tradition holds that Sheba was Ethiopian, or at least part of a broader Ethiopian empire, and that she bore Solomon a child, Menelik. According to Ethiopian lore, Menelik returned to Jerusalem as a young man, learned under his father's tutelage, and then went back home, bringing with him a host of Israelites who would become the Beta Israel, also known as Falashas, in Ethiopia. So, are modern Ethiopian Jews literally carrying Solomonic DNA? That's the claim many Ethiopian Jews make. Whether you see it as literal or legendary, it's deeply woven into Ethiopian culture. Next time you're in a debate about King Solomon's 700 wives, just remember that maybe not all his relationships were purely biblical. The notion that Ethiopia, and by extension Africa, has an ancient Jewish lineage is a powerful testament to the continent's role in shaping biblical history. The emergence of white Israelis, a historical puzzle. Now, here's where the story takes a sharp turn. If the ancient Israelites had such a pronounced African presence, why does the modern global Jewish population, especially the majority in Israel today, appear predominantly white? Enter the Khazar hypothesis. In the 8th century, a Turkic people in Eastern Europe called the Khazars purportedly converted to Judaism en masse. This kingdom sprawled from modern-day Ukraine to Kazakhstan, strategically straddling trade routes like the Silk Road. After the Khazar kingdom's decline, many of these Jewish converts drifted westward into Poland, Lithuania, Germany, and elsewhere. Over centuries, through marriages and assimilation with local European populations, these communities evolved into the Ashkenazi Jews. Imagine a medieval marketing campaign. Join us. We're the Khazars bridging east and west. And yes, we're all Jewish now. But jokes aside, historians still debate how large an impact the Khazars really had on the Ashkenazi gene pool. Some suggest it was minimal. Others see it as a significant contributor to what became a more European-looking Jewish population. Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews caught in the middle, but Ashkenazim aren't the only large Jewish population that ended up with lighter skin tones. Sephardi Jews trace their lineage to the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, and Portugal, before being expelled in 1492 and spread to places like North Africa, the Balkans, and the Ottoman Empire. Over time, many integrated into local European or Mediterranean cultures, picking up new languages like Ladino and adopting different features than those of earlier Semitic or African peoples. Meanwhile, Mizrahi Jews hail from Middle Eastern and North African backgrounds. Many lived harmoniously for centuries in countries like Iraq, Iran, Morocco, and Yemen. But once Israel was founded in 1948, large waves of these Jews migrated to the new Jewish state. Were they welcomed with open arms? Not quite. They often faced discrimination from the dominant Ashkenazi establishment, who sometimes saw Mizrahi cultures as backward or too Arab. Some claim the Israeli government systematically pressured Mizrahi and Sephardi newcomers to Europeanize themselves, i.e., lighten up. Could it be that Western powers were behind a push to create a more European Israel in the heart of the Middle East, ensuring global alliances and a strategic foothold? The Ethiopian Jew experience, when blackness couldn't hide. Of all the groups that faced assimilation pressures, Ethiopian Jews, commonly referred to as Beta Israel or Falashas, stand out as a glaring example of the tensions around race and identity in modern Israel. Throughout the late 20th century, and especially in secret operations like Operation Moses and Operation Solomon, thousands of Ethiopian Jews were airlifted to Israel. Initially greeted by celebratory headlines, many soon discovered an undercurrent of racism and suspicion about whether they were real Jews. Stories of police brutality have emerged repeatedly, culminating in high-profile incidents like the 2019 shooting of 18-year-old Solomon Teka and the 2015 beating of Damas Pakada, an Ethiopian Israeli soldier in uniform. These events sparked massive protests, revealing a fault line in Israeli society. While the official narrative prides itself on uniting all Jews, Ethiopian Israelis reported feeling singled out by their skin color, an unwelcome echo of systemic discrimination found elsewhere. Some cynics joke that everyone is equal in Israel, except you might want to watch out if you look too African. But behind the dark humor is a painful reality for many Ethiopian Israelis, who believe fulfilling their religious and national duty would guarantee acceptance. The Israeli Black Panthers, a forgotten movement. Interestingly, discrimination concerns stretch beyond Ethiopian Jews. Way back in the early 1970s, a group of young Mizrahi Jews founded the Israeli Black Panther movement in Jerusalem's Musharraf neighborhood. They appropriated the term black to highlight their marginalization within Israeli society, drawing parallels to the African-American struggle for civil rights. Yes, you heard that right. Israel had its own Black Panthers. But wait, weren't these Mizrahi Jews also considered white by Western standards? Sort of, but it's complicated. Mizrahi communities are from the Middle East and North Africa. They often have darker complexions, and historically many Ashkenazim saw them as lower status. The symbolic choice of black pointed to social and institutional racism lurking beneath Israel's official unified family storyline. The gaps in scholarship and why it matters. Why don't we hear more about these racial realities in Israel? Many scholars of Israel and Middle Eastern studies either sidestep the topic or treat it superficially. The concept of blackness in Israel does not map neatly onto the well-known American black-white dichotomy. With a patchwork of identities, Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Mizrahi, Beta Israel, plus waves of Eastern European immigrants. One can't just say Israeli whereas white. And yet, if you look at power structures, who predominantly runs institutions, who's more likely to face police violence, color lines do seem to matter. Is there a global hush-hush directive among academics to steer clear of labeling certain Israeli policies racist for fear of anti-Israel backlash? Or is it simply that race in Israel is too messy for the standard categories that scholars apply in, say, the United States or the UK? Perhaps future genealogists will discover that every Israeli is a complicated mosaic of African, Middle Eastern, Khazar, and European ancestry. And they'll collectively throw up their hands saying, "We have no idea which box to check. Palestinians, colonialism, and the white oppressor narrative." Another pivotal piece of the puzzle, the relationship between Israeli Jews and Palestinians. Some argue that the creation of Israel, largely by European Jews post-Holocaust, introduced a colonial dynamic in the Middle East, with a white settler state dominating an indigenous, predominantly brown or Arab population. Yet even that narrative can oversimplify. Many Mizrahi Jews lived in Arab countries for centuries before they too were displaced. But as the transcript highlights, African or Afrocentric critiques can recast these tensions in stark terms. If biblical Israel was black, how did we get to a scenario where the white oppressor has overshadowed not only Palestinian Arabs, but also black Jews like Ethiopians? Is there a deeper pattern of global colonialism that required rewriting biblical history in Europe's image? Could there be a centuries-long plot to whitewash the chosen people for political gain? Or is it simpler, just a natural outcome of shifting demographics, migrations, and the unstoppable tide of assimilation? The call for a rethink equality, solidarity, coexistence. By now you might be wondering, so what? These are fascinating historical tidbits, but what do we do with them? The final portion of the transcript suggests forging a new path, one where we recognize that Israel's story is far from homogeneous, that blackness plays a significant role in the experiences of many Jews, and that the Palestinian struggle is intimately wrapped up with these issues of race and identity. A triple call to action emerges. Acknowledge the African heritage. That includes original biblical ties to Egypt, Ethiopia, and beyond, plus the lived experiences of Beta Israel and Mizrahi communities. End the walls, literally and figuratively, rethinking the physical and psychological barriers that separate communities in Israel and Palestine. Champion equality and justice. Accepting that diverse Israel is more than just a slogan. If the state was originally formed as a refuge for oppressed people, it needs to eradicate internal hierarchies and prejudices. If the UN can't solve the Middle East conflict, maybe we need a global genealogical test to prove everyone's deeply connected. Then we can hold the biggest family reunion in Jerusalem with a giant potluck of African, Middle Eastern, and European dishes. Where conspiracies flourish and hope remains, as with any hot-button topic, conspiratorial theories abound. Did white Jews purposely rewrite biblical narratives? Are major world powers complicit in covering up an African Israel? Or is the real conspiracy that we keep dividing ourselves into black, white, Arab, European, when the truth is far more interwoven? It's easy to get lost in the swirl of theories, especially online, where every corner of social media can magnify rumor and speculation. But maybe, just maybe, a bit of that conspiratorial spark can push us to ask better questions about the stories we take for granted. Because if we never ask, why do we assume the ancient Israelites looked a certain way? Or, how did European Jews become the face of Jewish identity? Then we'll never uncover the complex mosaic that is Israel's past and present. In an era of DNA tests and global connectivity, will we soon see a wave of personal epiphanies, people discovering they have Jewish or African roots they never knew about? Conclusion. So there you have it, fellow wanderers of Veil of Time. The question of who is truly an Israelite might not be a matter of black and white, figuratively or literally. History, culture, migrations, and yes, a fair bit of power, dynamics and prejudice all shape what we see today. Ancient Israelites may indeed have had strong African ties. Modern Israelis have inherited the complexities of the Khazars, the Sephardim, the Mizrahim, Soviet immigrants, and more. And wedged in between, Ethiopians and Palestinians, each with their own claims of belonging, stand as reminders that the story is far from finished. Before you close this tab and go on with your day, let's pop a final question. Does reshaping our understanding of biblical history change how we see each other in the present? Maybe yes, maybe no. But knowledge can foster empathy, realizing that the human tapestry is more intertwined than any neat category can capture. We can choose to build a future where the lines that separate Black, White, Arab, and Jew blur in favor of shared humanity. Thank you all for watching, or shall I say, for traveling with me through the labyrinth of Israel's multi-layered past. If you enjoyed peeling back this particular veil, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your own theories, questions, and yes, conspiracies. After all, Veil of Time is where every perspective is welcome, so long as it helps us see the world a little clearer, and perhaps with a touch more compassion. Stay curious, stay questioning, and until next time, keep lifting those veils one by one.